Hi, welcome to the Standing for Freedom podcast, where we defend life, liberty, and truth to ensure that the foundations of freedom are preserved for the next generation. I'm joined today by Joshua Philipp. He is the host of Crossroads at Epoch Times. Joshua, welcome.
Hey, real pleasure being here. Some good stuff to go into.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I want to talk about Epoch Times because you guys have grown tremendously, especially last year. You've been growing a lot, but last year especially with the Wuhan virus, with the lockdowns, China is at the forefront of all this. They're to be blamed. You guys did a lot of work in exposing that, and I wanted to talk about the documentary, how big tech is censored and even canceled that, and then some other things as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, how long do we have again?
Yeah, we have plenty of time.
I'm just joking.
Yeah.
A lot to go into, a lot we can touch on.
Yeah.
I mean, so my beat at Epoch Times since 2008, I mean, I'm the senior investigative reporter there, and my beat since 2008 has been on Chinese subversion and unconventional warfare. The way my whole career on that started was I accidentally, back in 2008, uncovered one of the Chinese Communist Party's main spy branches, which is the United Front Work Department. And I mean, over time, it's gone from a lot of this being really niche, like, you know, you had some military guys and maybe some like specialty journalists and magazines maybe like talking about it, but not really writing about it. But it only became, I think, mainstream within the past few years. Let
me go back to this. In case you weren't listening, you just said in 2008, you were interning and you uncovered this thing. That's a pretty big deal. Okay, so how did you get to the internship? How did you even get to Epoch Times? What were you doing at Epoch Times? Where did you go to school? How did you even get there?
So long story short, I mean, I was going to community college in San Diego. It's Southwestern College. It's right where the Mexican border meets like the Pacific Ocean. You know, it's like a small school, interesting school. But basically, they had it so, you know, you could get an A in your journalism class if you get an article published in a newspaper. And so I was sending in articles to, you know, newspapers. Epoch Times was one of them. And, you know, since 2006 to 2008, I was just writing for them because I liked what they were doing. You know, they were defending a lot of human rights issues in China, exposing things happening. And really not a lot of publications are talking about a lot of that. And so I thought they were great. 2008, they said, hey, how'd you like a summer internship? You know, I was like, sure, you know, me like a bright-eyed, you know, bushy-tailed, like little college kid, you know, I'm like, that's right. I'm like, let's do it, you know, great. I go there, and they assign me, all this weird incident takes place. Now, this is 2008, right ahead of the Beijing Olympics. So this is relevant again, because now we have the, we have the Beijing Olympics coming up again soon. Why we're having it in China twice in a row, who knows, right? But anyways, the Beijing Olympics, the Bloody Olympics, they called them in 2008, was starting. And there was a really bizarre series of incidents that was starting. There were hundreds of Chinese individuals physically beating, spitting on, threatening to kill, and physically attacking other members of the Chinese community. And they were targeting Falun Gong practitioners, persecuted group in China, House Christians, persecuted group in China, and democracy activists, again, persecuted in China, as we've seen now with Hong Kong. They were attacking them on the streets. And I mean, I'm covering it. I've never seen anything like this. And people are there, they're like, oh yeah, all those people attacking us are spies. And I'm like, there's like hundreds of them. I'm like, those guys aren't spies. You know, you look at the guy and he's wearing like, you know, like a wife beater and he's like sweating on himself. He doesn't shave. I'm like, that's not a spy. I'm thinking James Bond, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I couldn't believe it at first.
Kind of like a lone wolf type of thing.
Yeah,
right.
I couldn't believe it at first, right? I was like, no, this is, I don't know what this is, but it's not spies. Over time, I started noticing really strange anomalies, which is these groups, they would have bullhorns with the names of Chinese associations on them. And you'd see the same Chinese association names on banners they'd carry for some weird reason. Names like the Fujian American Association, the Shandong Association, the Peking Association, and others. I came to find out, because I was like, okay, what are these? These are what you call Tongs. Tongs are like the unofficial governing bodies of Chinatowns. Tongs are the reason why Chinatowns are such insulated and unique immigrant communities. Now, Tongs are not necessarily bad. They go back to traditional Chinese culture. Basically,
real quick, is that similar to, like, you know, you go back in the early 1900s, you have the mafia ruling certain I mean, is it similar to that?
Kind of.
Okay,
So,
keep going.
the Chinese mafia operates under the Tongs.
Okay.
And I'll explain that. So,
yeah.
basically, traditional Chinese culture, society, you didn't have government for the most part, through most of their history, below the county level, right? The government stopped at the county level. Below the county level, you had a bottom-up form of government. That was family associations, hometown associations, guilds, things like this. Those are the Tongs. When Chinese people immigrated outside of China, they maintained the Tong structure. And so Chinatowns are like self-governing bodies run by the Tongs, basically. And it's hard for police to get into them, hard for a lot of that stuff, because they're insulated because of the Tong structure. They have tens of thousands of members, some claim hundreds of thousands of members. When the Chinese Communist Party, I found out, wanted to start infiltrating other countries through what they call the United Front, and the United Front is not unique to China, the Communist Party. Almost all communist parties have had united fronts. North Korea has one, Soviet Union had one, like their friendship associations and things like that. Those are united fronts. When they gain control over a Tong, they gain control over a huge segment of the population. And they can use that for, say, infiltrating politics. They can use it for getting into government. They can use it to get into intelligence agencies, businesses. They have oil worker Tongs. They have police Tongs. They have tech worker Tongs. They have Tongs for every segment of society. And through that, because of the way the connections work, you have to do favors for people and so on, they can tap any person at any position within the Tong structure. Wow. Now, beneath the Tongs are the triads, the Chinese mafia. It turned out one of the big ones that was involved in these attacks, as I would discover, was the Fuqing gang. And the Fuqing gang operates in New York at least, under the Fujian American Association. The Fuqing gang is one of the largest transnational organized crime groups in the world. They're human traffickers, drug traffickers, you name it, they do it. They were the ones behind the Golden Venture, which was this human trafficking ship that ran aground off the coast of New York. A lot of people died on it. And so this was what I uncovered. Then I found that the Chinese consulate general at that time, a guy named Peng Ke-yu, was meeting with the people who were physically attacking other members of the community. And then I found local politicians were also involved in it as well. This started a multi-year-long investigation, uncovered quite a bit, and won some awards for it, and also won award for it, I should say. And then also a lot of the original government reports on the Tongs and on Chinese subversion were actually pulled pretty heavily from my articles.
Wow. And that was all in 2008?
Started 2008. This is how my job as an investigative reporter started, and I worked on that until about 2012.
Holy cow. So here we are, fast forward, China has become not just more relevant, it's basically the news cycle. China is the news cycle. Everything that has happened in 2020, China owes not only the United States, but the rest of the world, right? They need to be held accountable. But how do we do that if news media, right, big tech, corporate news, won't really even cover China? They talk about it, but they don't actually talk with precision, with specifics about what China's done.
Well, this is where my unintentional beat gets interesting, which is a lot of this ties into the CCP, and China's Communist Party systems for unconventional warfare, for subversion. Subversion is how you take over a country from within. You don't conquer it with tanks and guns and bombs and planes and so on. You get control of the institutions that basically control the country. For the United States, how do you conquer a nation? What do you get if you conquer a nation? You control their economy, control their manufacturing, you influence their politics, you influence the culture. Which of these is the CCP not doing? They control Hollywood. They give paid ads to most of our major newspapers. A lot of journalists even do paid trips to China. Almost all major media have done it. Corporate structures that run a lot of these news media in the US, there's only, 6 corporations control most of the media. Almost all of them have deep, deep ties with the Chinese Communist Party. Some of them, including Bloomberg News, for example, has even come out and said that they won't really cover negative news on China, because when they started several years back, The CCP threatened Bloomberg terminals, financial terminals. Corporate interest affects these things. Who controls our manufacturing? Right? What factories, how many of our factories are in China? How much of the world's factories does the CCP control? What is one of the main stated goals of communism, right? Seize the means of production. Who controls global means of production? Natural resources, factories, big businesses. Businesses that aren't directly controlled by them work closely with them because they want access to the Chinese market. And politicians, many of them also want to appease this because they get lobbied, ironically, by businesses that are being given their talking points by the CCP. Businesses lobby our government on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. And this is just, I mean, a small part of the picture. This is a huge picture that really involves a lot of moving parts. How many academics were found to have been taking gifts from China under Trump? Remember those stories?
Oh yeah, the Confucius Institutes and everything else. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it goes deeper than that too. There's the Confucius Institutes. Epoch Times actually, we've exposed the first stories on that, which are Chinese Communist Party paid for programs tied to the propaganda department and so on, operating in US schools. The CCP pays the schools sometimes to basically open up centers where they teach classes and provide all the teachers. They're teaching them the CCP's version of history. They're teaching them the CCP's narratives. There are groups like the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations operating at US universities. These are the student groups oftentimes that you hear say, angry that Americans offended China. These groups are financed by and controlled by, and by their own admission, get guidance by the local Chinese consulates. And it goes deeper than this. Politicians, again, going there, academics going there, think tanks, schools doing joint programs, research programs with the CCP. All these come with strings attached.
I think when people hear stuff like this, I think the cognitive dissonance that kind of enters into their brain is, there's no way they could have that much control. And yet you see, obviously, how much economic power and leverage they have, political power, cultural power, as they infiltrate various academic institutions, like you said, Hollywood. They can tell their own narrative. Meanwhile, I think even when, last year I remember President Trump calling it the Chinese virus, the China virus. Why? Because it came from China. And what was interesting was to see the reaction from the Chinese government that doesn't care about racism. If we see their record on human rights, it's clear they don't actually care that.
They don't.
But they understand propaganda. They understand psychological warfare and all of that. So their response was, well, that's just a racist claim. They're using our rules against us.
The CCP actually has a word for that. It's strangle you with your own systems. They actually have groups in China, academic programs that study kind of how countries operate. They will have people working for the military intelligence agencies who studied the cultural nature and weaknesses of America. What is the most sensitive issue in America? It's race, really, right? And so they use it. It's totally hypocritical, as you mentioned. The Chinese Communist Party, as we speak, right, as we speak, is carrying out genocide in Xinjiang, right, and also called East Turkestan, where you have these Muslim Uyghurs. They have actual slave camps in China, as we speak, acknowledged. Many U.S. corporations, the ones trying to preach to us about America's evil history of slavery, are using slave labor in China as we speak, right? And to the point where even if they speak badly about it, they come out quickly and apologize because the CCP comes after their business interests. What happened with LeBron James, right? What happened with the guys from South Park? I mean, they stood their ground, right? The CCP will try to silence anybody who criticizes these things. They do the same thing in Tibet. They do the same thing in Inner Mongolia. They do the same thing with a lot of other ethnic groups in China. They carry out persecutions against anybody who is seen as being any form of threat against the powers of the CCP. And that could be something as simple as believing there's a power higher than the Communist Party, like you believe in Christianity or another religion. This is the reality in China.
Wow. How does, for those watching, listening, how does Christianity, and then I can think of maybe some other groups, I don't know if the LDS church is there or others, but how does that operate then in China? Is it total surveillance? Is it underground? How does it work?
So, important history, a lot of people may not know it. Christianity goes back very far in China. I mean, long time you have Christianity in China. It was one of the few countries in the world we had religions, multiple religions, being in relative harmony with each other.
I'll add to that, in the 1800s, there was a missionary by the name of Lottie Moon, and Southern Baptists know of Lottie Moon, but she made inroads into China. This was all back in imperial China, but built tons of churches, and she's really well known. The Southern Baptist Convention, about 14 million so people, they have an offering every Christmas, and they call it the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, and it's based on that history and tradition.
Yeah. Cultural Revolution in China, when the Communist Party starts taking over, they launch programs to eliminate, to a large extent, religion. They talk about the four olds. Now, Chinese people living in America, this is important. When a lot of them see what's happening in America right now, this is the memory that it invokes. You had people tearing down statues, right? You had people criticizing the history and culture of the country. They talked about the four olds, old beliefs, old traditions, old religions, these types of things they were trying to destroy. If you had flowers in front of your house, you could be called a riotist, you could be imprisoned. If you believed in God, you'd be accused of believing in one of the four olds, you could be imprisoned, or at least publicly humiliated and beaten, right? They took priests of every religion and they put them in prison, killed them, publicly humiliated them, and so on. And then they established their own state-run versions of the religion, like the China Buddha Association, for example, which was an altered version, state-run by the Communist Party. They did the same thing to Christianity, same thing to Taoism, same thing to others. Now, when they have this, they have the state-run version of the religion that is altered. It is altered to be under the Communist Party. And so God is beneath the Communist Party. I've had Christians in China tell me that they, for example, they've had churches and a Communist Party official walks in, and one said they had the 10 Commandments on the wall. I said, that first one has to go, right? Because there's no power higher than the Communist Party, right? And so if you want to practice the real religions, you're a persecuted group in China. You're a house Christian or another group like that. And this means you're risking persecution at every moment, every day. Imprisonment, live organ harvesting, re-education through labor, you name it.
When we talk about the Uyghur population, what are the various, we know about the live harvesting of organs, what's happening to the families?
Right. So Epoch Times, we actually were the first media to break the story on live organ harvesting. And I'll get into the families in a minute, but the stories were hard to believe at first, but credible enough to where we felt it was necessary to report. And I mean, it's disturbing to even talk about it. I think people get a bit queasy even hearing about it. But the first whistleblower we had two. One was a military official, one was the wife of a surgeon. The wife of the surgeon comes out, and she's distraught. She says her husband, basically in China, he was a surgeon, couldn't sleep at night, cold sweats, staring off into the distance, right? He wasn't himself anymore. And finally, one day, he confides in her and says, my job is to harvest the corneas from the eyes of children. And she divorces him, and she comes to America, and she breaks the story. We had military officials saying they bring people on trains, military trains, like hung up like cattle, with chains on their wrists like this, right? Horrifying stories, things that were hard to believe at first, but over time we've been reporting it and exposing it and talking to people who've been in prison in China and the weird blood tests they give them and things like this. And over time, yes, it's become well accepted that this is absolutely happening in China. Now, in places like Xinjiang, which a lot of people would argue in China is going to be the model for persecutions and state control throughout most of the country eventually. And if the CCP can, let's say, succeed with its goals, maybe many parts of the world. They have high-tech surveillance programs, biometric data surveillance programs, things like your eyes, your facial expressions, DNA tests, so on. They have sensors on the streets. Sometimes they'll put CCP monitors in the homes of people. Sometimes women get raped by them. There's lots of cases of this. And there's nothing you can do about it. The CCP controls everything. There's no way to defend yourself against them. And they monitor everything you do at every time of the day. They have things like the social credit system.
Yes.
You know.
Talk a little bit about that.
The social credit system is something that's currently in China, but through the One Belt, One Road initiative, where the CCP is building technology infrastructure around the world, that they're building in other countries as well. Places like Darwin, Australia, has already instituted part of it. Many countries in Africa and Latin America already have it. This is a key part of the CCP's model of government. And even as we speak in the United States, not being done by government, but being done by big businesses, they're working on similar technologies. They already have the data for it, and they're working on similar technologies.
Yeah.
And what is this? It's a system that monitors every single thing that you do. Every friend you have, every connection you have, every one of your family members. What are you buying online? What are you saying online? What are you doing? You know, if you're, for example, a normal Chinese person, you buy alcohol, too much of it, you might get your social credit score lowered. If you're a Muslim in China, like the Uyghurs, and you buy alcohol, you don't buy alcohol because they're not supposed to drink, you might get your social credit score lowered because you're practicing religion. They have ways of keeping track of what you're purchasing. Are you doing too much of something they don't like? And you know, it's because it's a state-run morality system. Morals are determined by government policy, and they change based on government policy. And so you have to keep an eye on what the government's doing. They call it political correctness in China. Yeah. 1967 Mao Zedong, wow, which is where it comes from, right, the term. Political moral system that changes based on political policy. And your social score is raised or lowered basically on all these things. Do you believe in democracy? Are you a Christian, right? Do you believe in religion? These can all affect your social score. And your social score determines your freedom or your oppression in the society. You know, the gulags of the Soviet Union are no longer necessary under system. Maybe, and China still hasn't, but if this spreads globally, the gulags will no longer be necessary. Your gulag is going to be broke and homeless, and you can't make purchases in stores. You're going to have to beg for your food, right? Yeah. They have the digital yuan now tied to this, the digital currency tied to this, where every single purchase can be controlled. The CCP can confirm or deny any purchase you make because there's no longer physical money. They're spreading that globally. So what happens? You go to the store and you want to buy food. Oh, sorry, comrade, you know, your social credit score is too low, you can't buy food today. This is how they control people and punish people, and this is the system. This is one of these systems that they're exporting.
So it's a technocratic authoritarianism along those lines. Okay, so wow. Lots there, and I will say it's a bleak picture of China, and that's the reality. Where would you say China is most vulnerable today?
So yes, it's a bleak picture, but the Chinese Communist Party is more brittle than it's ever been. The Chinese Communist Party and their leadership right now is acting in a way that suggests they're terrified of something. I would say overall, ideology is their weakest link. This is why, you know, why does the CCP censor the internet? Why do they not want people to know about the Tiananmen Square massacre? Why do they spread disinformation about groups like Falun Gong, who they've been persecuting and harvesting the organs of? Why do they try to hide every abuse they do? Why do they try to cover up everything? Why do they go to such great lengths to control the internet, to control information, to control media, and to control what everyone's saying to each other? It's because their issues cannot withstand the light of day. And if the Chinese people could see what the CCP is doing, the CCP would die overnight. The things they do cannot withstand scrutiny, the things they do cannot withstand criticism, and the things they do cannot withstand truth. Now, within the Chinese Communist Party itself, you have a lot of infighting right now. There's rumors that a top-level intelligence official just defected to the United States. The CCP is denying it, but they're not giving proof otherwise. At the same time, the CCP, Xi Jinping himself, as a matter of fact, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, is demanding loyalty oaths from all the top leaders of every part of the Communist Party, demanding loyalty oaths and specifically also saying that there are traitors in our midst. There's infighting within the Communist Party, infighting at the top levels of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, on one level, this means they're afraid of something, but at the same time, and it means also they're brittle, right? There's a lot of other issues we go into, but they're very brittle right now. At the same time, I'd say they're more dangerous right now. They're like that cornered dog, You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The whole world community started seeing through the lies of the Chinese Communist Party during the COVID outbreak, during the outbreak of the CCP virus. When the CCP launched a program called Wolf Warrior Diplomacy, where they were criticizing foreign leaders, sanctioning U.S. officials like Mike Pompeo and others, right? Where they were threatening trade war on Australia because these countries were calling for investigations into the origin of the virus that came from China. What was the CCP trying to hide, right? If the CCP wanted to, say, tout itself as the world leader in dealing with the virus, why was it not using that position? Maybe they were afraid of something, right? Maybe they were worried that people would find something, right? And the CCP launched a very aggressive, very hostile form of diplomacy that turned a lot of the world against it. At the same time, they started border conflicts with India. They started trade wars kind of again with Japan. They ended Hong Kong's autonomy. I mean, you could go country by country and all the things they've done. They've burned their bridges to a lot of countries in the world. There's a lot of pushback against them. Many people now see the CCP for what it is, more so than ever. And it's because of this as well that on one side it's delicate, it's brittle. The Communist Party is, let's say, it's uncertain whether the CCP can continue to hold power if this trajectory continues. At the same time, though, it's also more dangerous. Because for the Communist Party of China, killing 30 million people is nothing. For them, it would be good for the future of the country because you have 30 million young men who will never get married because of the one-child policy where they killed little girls, you know? The CCP has, issues like that. They have issues where they need to maintain, let's say, keep an external enemy to keep people focused on something else. To start a war at this time would be economically and socially beneficial to the Communist Party of China, and they know this, and they've talked about this. And so they're delicate and they're brittle, but they're also very dangerous.
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting when you think about the fall of the Soviet Union. It happened basically, it seemed like overnight, but internally they were being degraded from within. Economically, it was much, much different for the Soviet Union. I think it was 1991, then Yeltsin comes to power, but basically almost overnight. I've met some Russians who talk about that they were just like, whoa, what happened? I mean, it just instantly, slowly, and then yet instantly it happened. Right now, it seems like China has everything, like you were saying about with production and manufacturing and all the Belt and Road Initiative, their advancement technologically, internally, and then externally. So do you see this coming to blows where potentially, we're in an armed conflict?
I think the CCP would want that. At the same time, though, I think militarily they know they're not strong enough for it yet, which is the reality. Their plan for military strength in that regard is like 2049, and so it's too soon for them. But they still control a lot of things when it comes to foreign influence, and they might start trying, for example, like a regional conflict. Having a war with India wouldn't be far-fetched, and proxy wars. Well, and they're talking about retaking Taiwan as well.
Wow. Wow. Joshua, this is all fascinating. It really, really is. And it's interesting in the audience, kind of the circles that we communicate in. We have the church, and then obviously the state, the civic sphere, the public arena. We're trying to get Christians not only to think biblically, but also to be very well informed about what's happening around the world and not to be taken for granted. Do you see China working with not-for-profits here in the United States as well, buying influence in that way?
They do.
Okay, I just want to hear that, a little piece on that too. What have you uncovered?
Well, so the Chinese Communist Party, I mentioned one strategy, which is they call it, the slogan is strangle you with your own systems, right? Yeah. They have another one called the borrowed boat strategy, where you use another person's vehicle to achieve something. The CCP, this is classic disinformation. The Soviets did the same thing. The idea of the Soviets was, if they wanted to spread false news, right, they don't do it under Pravda or something like that, their state-run media. They do it under like Wall Street Journal or New York Times. They try to at least. Because an article carried in a Western outlet is a trusted outlet for Westerners, whereas under the Soviet Union's main publication, it would not be. Now, the Chinese Communist Party, one example is they run paid inserts in most U.S. publications, including New York Times and others, under things like China Watch and so on. They have other programs as well working on stuff like that. When it comes to nonprofits, few things they'll do. One thing is you have it could be registered by a Tong member in the United States who's an American citizen, right? American citizen, Chinese American, doesn't matter, right? Who can just register a company that will serve the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. They do this regularly. You can have an organization, they can fund a think tank. They can fund, for example, a nonprofit that's going to say, push false narratives about, say, race issues or social issues in the United States. I know of many organizations like this that are tied to the CCP. This is how they do it. It's easy to do. America's an open system, and they work through the open system of the United States to use our own systems against us.
Wow. We're going to have to leave it there. It's fascinating. It really is. I really appreciate the work of the Epoch Times. You know, I don't know of any other news outlet that covers things the way that you do, in a way that I think has awakened most Americans, Westerners, to what's really going on. We can't afford to be ignorant of the devil's schemes, and I think that when you see what the CCP is doing, it's really exactly that. There is a dark, sinister force that's being mobilized and is using these means, whether it be technology, like you say, economics, some kind of subterfuge, spy campaigns, all of this stuff. And on a scale that we've probably never seen before, very much like what it says in Revelation. So it's all very fascinating. I really appreciate you coming on to talk to us, and thank you for all you do at Crossroads and Epoch Times. And where can our listeners find you?
They can find my show Crossroads at epochtv.com/Crossroads.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.